All right, everybody, today we are asking the question, is glycine a scam now? And I realize that's a very provocative question to ask, and I can see that I've chosen a subject and maybe framed it in a way to deliberately be somewhat provocative, sensationalized, one might even say clickbaity, but it's not entirely without justification. This is something that people have been wondering. Glycine is a brand with a rich heritage and history, but with changes to its business model lately, it's been asked just how quality of a brand is Glycine now? Is it still the brand that we know, that's still the company with that rich heritage and history and quality, or is it now something different? And the reason people ask this question, of course, is what happened to Glycine a few years ago when it got bought out by Invicta. Invicta, a watch brand that's famous, or perhaps one might better say infamous, for extremely aggressive marketing, shall we say, and even potentially marketing that could be characterized as misleading. So what Invicta loves to do, or has done at least in the past, very heavily, is to advertise an extremely high suggested retail price and then discount heavily. So it'll sell a watch for $100 and claim a MSRP of $500 or $1,000. So this watch is 87% off. It's only $65 and you're getting a watch that's worth $500. When this is the sort of advertisement that goes up sometimes on shadier sites, or Invicta in the past even would sell their watches through online or TV home shopping network and things like that, and advertise 80% off, 90% off discounts, $100 for a watch that is worth $600-$700. You get a watch for $55. And Invicta did this a lot. This really misleading MSRP pricing strategy and extreme discounting strategy to try to kind of set that kind of anchoring effect for the customer for how much their watch was worth, when everyone really knows that it's not a $800 watch, it's a $100 watch. The thing is, though, that it must be said, in all fairness, that Invicta seems to be somewhat moving away from this strategy. I mean, these days anyone can hop on Amazon and see that, this is a $80 watch, right? I don't think anyone seriously believes any longer that Invicta is a $500 brand. It's a sub $100 brand, and for under $100 you get a reasonable watch for the money. I mean, it's quality construction, it's automatic movement, Japanese movement, but it's robustly built. The often has a mineral crystal. This is a watch that will last you a good long while. For under $100 you could do a lot worse. So that was Invicta, but Invicta sells a lot of watches because, like I said, they sell a reasonable watch for the price. And Glycine was recently purchased by Invicta. So, all right, so what about Glycine? Well, Glycine's not on this particular slide. This is a slide of the Swatch Group, but it kind of helps us place where Glycine was. All right, so Glycine was selling watches in the $1,000, $2,000 kind of range, kind of vintage inspired, very aviation heritage type watches. And if we compare it to how the Swatch Group organizes the brands, they were kind of a high range brand. All right, so Longines, Rado, Union, Glashütte, these were brands that watches starting at about $1,000 and they go up to $2,000, $3,000. So that's kind of the space that Glycine was playing in the past. And they were, to be fair, struggling. All right, they were struggling to remain profitable, struggling to stay in business, honestly. And so Invicta came along and bought out Glycine and injected a whole bunch of capital. And the promise that Invicta made was Glycine is going to remain Glycine. We're just going to bring in our marketing muscle, our sales muscle, our distribution network, and help Glycine reach a new market. And that's what they said. But something interesting happened. All right, so Glycine, remember, used to be $1,000 or $2,000 to get a watch from Glycine, and in fact, as I understand it, even today in Europe, that's how much they're selling their watches for. But when Invicta came in, yes, they changed, they injected their marketing muscle, and they changed the marketing strategy. What is Invicta's marketing strategy? Well, it's the crazy discounting. So We see here, this is a Glycine Airman. The list price is $2,700. This is an authorized dealer, by the way, operating on eBay. And they discounted it 80% off. So now it's only $550. Now we've got here that same authorized dealer, the Combat Sub. The theoretical list price is $1,500. They've discounted it 75% off to under $400. This is a different authorized dealer of glycines. You can see they're doing a slightly smaller discount, 63% off, $600, but still heavily discounting, right? So again, another Combat Sub, 65% off, different AD. So it seems like, yeah, Invicta has taken over the marketing for glycine, and they've decided the marketing strategy is going to be the same heavy discounting. And when they started doing this, people started asking questions. Like, this watch used to sell for $1,000 or $2,000, so certainly at $500, $600, or at $400, this is a steal. But has the quality changed, right? Is the quality of the watch still truly in this kind of high range segment, or has it been cheapened? Has it been cheapened to now fit the new price bracket that glycine seems to be settling into? Glycine also frequently, their watches go up on mass drop, or it's now just called drop, right? So heavily discounting sales strategy. The question we need to ask ourselves is, in pursuing this strategy, like, surely some compromises have been made to get the price down this low. And if you read the forums, people have been saying that, ever since the Invicta buyout, the quality of the watch has gone down. Is that true or not? And we'll try to answer that question today. We're going to do that by comparing some glycine watches. In fact, we're going to be comparing a bronze Combat Sub, so a bronze version of this watch, this Combat Sub watch. We're going to compare that against some of glycine's competitors, both in its theoretical competitors at its theoretical price range of $1,000 to $2,000, and we'll compare it against a Longines dive watch. And we'll also compare it against, what we can say is its actual competitor in its true price range. So a Hamilton dive watch, which is kind of in the $500-600 area. So we'll take a close look at these watches, compare them side by side, and see if glycine, the quality has justifies, either its MSRP or kind of its actual market price at this point. Either $550 or $390, depending on how good of a deal you can find. All right, so let's get to it. All right, so first let's compare the Combat Sub bronze with a Longines Hydroconquest automatic 41mm. And it's not exactly a fair comparison, because this watch or other variants of this watch are basically available for about half as much as this is. But we're going to compare them anyway, because the Longines at about $1,000, $1,200 is in the price range that the glycine is theoretically in, based on their misleading MSRP. So the Longines is kind of in the price point that the glycine aspires or pretends to be in. So we'll do the comparison for that reason. So if we take a close look at this Combat Sub, and this one is bronze, but there are many of the stainless steel models that are a little cheaper from glycine that use basically the exact same dial. And I'm going to assume that all of their Combat Subs, I think it's fair to say, are going to be about the same in terms of the quality of the finish. And we've got right here the Longines Hydroconquest. So again, the Longines, I would say, as a brand, Longines is more of a maybe entry-level luxury or high-end, you could say high-end brand. It's $1,000 and up generally. And then Glycine used to attempt to play in that space, but in the past couple of years, they're now heavily discounting all their pieces. And I think that at least from these two watches, you can tell that these are not the same quality, right? So even though this is bronze, so it's theoretically a more valuable material, the dial itself, the Glycine, you can see it's a lot more of it is just printed on. The 24-hour markers are just printed on. The applied indices, that's supposed to be rose gold, but it looks kind of flimsy. The indices and hands are supposed to be rose gold, but honestly, it's pretty thin and paltry looking rose gold. And here, even though it's not a precious metal, you've got actually slightly smaller lume indices, but you've got the giant Arabic numerals that are also loomed up, and you can see that there's applied outlines to those, so that's not printed on. And the hands just look much sharper. There's a bevel to them, they look very sharp. The seconds hand, you can see, also just looks much sharper than this. This is just, it looks like plastic, actually, the red running seconds hand on this Glycine Combat Sub. It just looks like red plastic. I don't know what material it's made out of, but it doesn't look nice at all. It looks like something you would see in, a Timex or something like that, just plasticky, red seconds hand. And the other thing I have to say, and the thing that bothers me the most about this watch, is the lume on it. You can see it kind of has, it's not dark, we're in sunlight right now. We're not in direct sunlight, but we're in light. The lume kind of has this greenish, sickly pallor, I would say. It makes it look sickly because it's not quite pure white. It's kind of green. And it's almost like the lume is overactive, like it's kind of loomed up and glowing green even when it doesn't need to. And that just kind of makes the design of the dial, it's already a very busy design, it just makes the dial seem even busier. So it's got the plasticky red from the seconds hand, it's got the blue from the dial itself, the yellow from the bronze, and slightly different shade of yellow from the rose gold. And then it's got, instead of white, kind of a greenish tinge to the lume. I'm really hoping, because that's one of the things that I dislike most about this watch right now. I'm really hoping that for a bronze watch, you want it to look more vintage, more aged, and it is starting to get that beautiful patina, which I love. But the lume, I'm hoping it'll fade over time, and I don't know how long it'll take for it to do that. Whereas here, the lume is nice and crisp and white, so it just gives the design a more unified look, right? The white of the lume matches the white of the date indicator. And it just, it's a more modern design. It definitely doesn't have that vintage look because it's not bronze, but it looks very clean and consistent. Bezel action, this one, pretty crisp. I mean, it's no Rolex, but it's got a nice crisp turning bezel. You can hear it's quite sharp. 120 click bezel. This one, it's not terrible, but I think you can also hear it's a little mushier, a little softer, but it is easy to turn. Also 120 click bezel. So in terms of bezel, I will say that may be a little bit subjective. Like if you like a crisp bezel, a sharp bezel, or one that is a little mushier and in some ways easier to turn. Like this one is actually, because it's kind of crisp, it takes a little bit more force to turn. Whereas this one, because it's kind of mushy, it just kind of is. Gliding isn't exactly what you want a bezel to do, because you want a bezel to have a bit of tension there, so that it doesn't just go past where you're trying to time it. But it is easier to turn. So that's kind of a little bit subjective, but I would say that in terms of the crispness of the bezel action, this does feel slightly higher quality. So overall, they're not the same, right? And I would say that if you told me these were the same price, I would say that this is a far better buy, and this is kind of a ripoff. But of course, they're not the same price. This pretends to be in the same price category as Longines, but we all know that it's not anymore, and so it is what it is. On the back, they're both engraved. Taking a look at the crowns, yes, this one is bronze, so it's theoretically a more valuable, more precious metal than just the stainless steel case here, but it's still notably of a different product category. Like I would say this is kind of a mid-range kind of watch, and this is a high-end watch, or entry-level luxury. Really quickly, I'm going to show the other Glycine that I own, which is an Airman 42, and in many ways I like this one more than the Combat Sub. You can see the lume. It is weaker, so this one has like overactive lume. You turn off the lights and it glows. This one, the lume is weaker, but at least in normal light it doesn't have that sickly green look. So it looks a little better, especially for a vintage inspired watch. And you can see the syringe hands on this. I'll let it focus a little bit. The syringe hands on this have a nice little bevel to them, and they look kind of sharp. So this does have its own QC issues, but overall, I quite like the Airman. I think it's a very practical kind of beater travel watch. It's the kind of watch that, because it has the GMT function and it has the third time zone function, which not every GMT watch has that, the ability to track 3 time zones. It makes it just like a fun watch to travel with. If you're hopping through time zones, you can really quickly adjust and keep track of multiple time zones at once. Usually what I do is I actually keep home time on both the local and the 24-hour, just so I can, sometimes it's easier for me to see if it's day or night at home that way. And then my travel time, I'll adjust the bezel for my third time zone. So yeah, I quite like this and owning this watch. And I like it actually a bit more than this Combat Sub. Like I don't really regret owning this watch. I do have a few regrets about buying this one. But maybe I already like this one more than I did when I first got it, because of the patina is giving it some nice character. But it's very strange for it to be developing that patina. It looks strange for it to be developing that patina and giving that vintage look, while at the same time this loom has that same like neonish, neon green glow to it. Like you really want the loom to become creamy or at least white to complete that vintage look, and it's not doing that. And I don't know how long it'll take for it to achieve that. So yeah, I don't know, kind of mixed feelings. Let's see, what else do I want to say in terms of comparison? Oh yeah, so QC. This one I would say the Longines, there's basically no perceptible quality control issues to the naked eye. Like at least I couldn't see any. Like all the alignments look really excellent. So yeah, that's what you would expect from a high-end piece, for it to not have QC issues. This one sadly does have a handful of QC issues, I would say. So one of them is, let me focus it a bit. There are some alignment issues, especially at the 12 o'clock position. The really fat loom indices and the actual the indices and the really fat block of square rectangular loom doesn't quite align perfectly up there. So yeah, kind of a smallish QC issue. It's the sort of thing where once you see it, you kind of can't unsee it if you're thinking about it. But if you just glance at it, it's all right. This as well also has some QC issues, mostly to do with the alignment of the outer bezel, which is understandable for a more budget piece. So you can see I've rotated the bezel and then it doesn't quite line up perfectly. I've tried to get it to line up perfectly at this third time zone. But it doesn't quite line up. So you can see like right here, I've got 15 aligned with 24, but down here, I'm having trouble getting 3 lined up with 12. I'm gonna try. Let's actually try to improve that a little bit. See if I can all right. So it seems a little bit more aligned at the top, but see, still at the bottom, 3 is not quite aligned with 12. And then you can see just some of the other alignments aren't quite perfect. Again, I would say, this for the price, is not the same price as this, but you can tell. Like this looks like it's something that's about half as much as this, which is what it is. All right, now let's compare the Glycine against something that's more in its price range. This is a Hamilton Navy Scuba. It's a dive watch from Hamilton. This one's about $600 retail, but you can usually get like a 20% discount on it. So it ends up being, around $500 to $600. And this one, the pricing on it is all over the place. It's usually in the, $500, $400, $600 range. Let's talk a little bit more about the specs, because we kind of skipped over the specs earlier. This has a version of a modified ETA 2824 movement, although it's probably from Sellita. They used to advertise that they were using ETA movements, And people cracked open the cases after the Invicta buyout and found that, hey, in some cases, it looks like it's actually a Solida movement. But if it is a Solida movement, it's a Solida version of a ETA movement. So if that matters to you, usually, you know, ETA is considered the brand name movement, and Solida is kind of the budget knockoff version of it. But, you know, the 2824 is a movement that's used everywhere, and certainly used here. Hamilton is also using a modified ETA 2824 movement, but it's a heavily modified version of that movement, so that it has a much longer power reserve of, I think, up to 80 hours compared to like 38 here. So that's great. That's a huge power reserve. You can put this down for a weekend and come back and put it back on, and it'll keep on running. But the trade-off is, how do they get that kind of power reserve out of a 2824? Is they change the BPH. So the BPH on this is now 5, it's basically beating at 5 ticks per second, 5 beats per second, whereas the standard 2824 beats at 8 ticks per second. So that's the trade-off. I'm going to hold it up here so you can kind of see if it'll focus on the seconds hand, and you can see them ticking. Because it is a trade-off. You can see that the Hamilton seems to not tick quite as smoothly as the Glycine with the unmodified ETA move 2824 style movement, although it's probably not actually from ETA. So that's the downside of this. But I say, in terms of the movement, this movement is going to be theoretically higher quality because it is actually from ETA, ETA being a Swatch company, and Hamilton being, of course, a Swatch Group company. So that's one of the advantages of buying kind of a budget watch from the Swatch Group, is you actually get usually a very high quality movement for the price. You get kind of the brand name ETA movement, because it's basically Swatch selling themselves the movement. They give themselves a really good deal on it, and so you get really good value proposition in terms of the quality of the movement. And that is definitely the case here with Hamilton. So people usually say that the ETA movement, will last longer, is better built, even though the design is the same as the Solida movement. I don't even know the reference number of the Solida copy of the ETA movement, but and Glycine, of course, gives it the movement their own, like Glycine reference number, but we all know it's a modified Solida or ETA movement. All right. So that's the movement. They both have anti-reflective coating. This one slightly better water resistance at 200 meters. This one only goes up to 100 meters. But otherwise, they're pretty evenly matched in terms of the specs. I will say that the specs are also pretty close to the Longines that we saw previously. The Longines also using a 2824 ETA movement, also water resistant to, I believe, 200 meters. So the Longines, it's a pricier watch, but it's pricier because of the finish, not because of the mechanical specs. So yeah, spec-wise, they're pretty close match, which makes sense as they're in the same price range. If we take a little bit closer look at some of the subjective qualities now, I will say that I appreciate the finishing on the Hamilton here. I think the hands on the Hamilton, with that bevel, just look a little more substantial than the hands on the Glycine, which again look kind of flimsy. And this is purely subjective, but I do think the Hamilton aesthetically has a much more visually pleasing design. It's just much more unified. It definitely has a bit of a nod with all the triangular shapes to the, what was the name of the Hamilton watch? The Hamilton Ventura watch. So it kind of has like the rocket age design language, a lot of triangles. But the hands are triangular. You can see some of the bigger pips, the markers, bigger loom markers are also triangular. So that's just aesthetically, I think it's a very nice design. I also think aesthetically this design is nice and unified. So this one comes with the orange accent. It also comes with blue and I believe just white. But you can see it's got a very unified design. It is basically just using 3 colors, black and white, very neutral colors, and an accent color of orange. So, the orange accent color here, orange hands, and And of course, I guess you could say it's also got the metal as a fourth color. So very unified design, I think. Very pleasing to the eye. And again, as I've said before, I have mixed feelings about the aesthetic design of this. And this is purely aesthetic, so it's subjective. But there's a lot more going on. You can see it's much less unified. So the dial and the bezel are blue. The lume pips are this, the shade of green, which is deliberate, but it makes it look overactive. And then you've got white lettering and printed on, and then you've got a black and white date window. So I think this would look better if I got the blue version. I think this will look a lot better in the black version to just help make the design look more unified. But even then, you've got that additional red of the seconds hands, which is an additional color that just kind of comes out of nowhere. So not the biggest fan of the aesthetic quality of this, but that's subjective. You may disagree. And of course, this has two metals. It has the bronze, actually three, the bronze, the aluminum on the bezel, because the bezel is not actually bronze, and then the rose gold for the applied markers and the hands. And again, I just think these hands look flimsy. I don't know what it is. Is it that they're smaller, or that there's such a thin edge of rose gold? Or is it just that the lume is this greenish tinge that makes it look kind of weird? But other than the lume markers, you can see that both of these just have a lot of printed on indices and printed on 24-hour markers. So, you can see there's definitely a difference between these and the Longines we were looking at earlier, which again makes sense because, that's a different price range when we're talking about the Longines. One of the nice things about the Combat Sub, I will say, is that it's very svelte. So this is less of an unambiguous positive on a bronze watch. But if you look at this, is a 42 millimeter watch. This is a 40 millimeter watch. So, but this one, the lugs are so thin and svelte. They're both. This one's a 22 millimeter lug width. This one's 20 millimeter lug width. But this one just looks taller and skinnier. You could almost say, like someone who's taller but skinnier for the same amount of mass. So despite being 42 millimeters, this fits pretty well on my tiny wrists. So I would say that it's a small 42 millimeters, nice and svelte. And the other thing I would say is that it's not very tall. So I think this is like 11 millimeters, and I believe this is 14, if I recall correctly. But the point is, this is about 30% taller. So this ends up sitting quite chunky on the wrist, whereas this, because it's so thin, you put it on a NATO strap or just use leather straps, and it ends up hugging the wrist very well. So that's definitely a plus. So I've been bashing the aesthetics of this watch, but that component of it is really nice. The case design of it, I think, is quite good. The reason why it's not an unambiguous plus here is because this is a bronze watch. And if anything, you want the bronze watch to be chunkier, because if you see like here, you can hardly even, most of the surface area that you can see head on is not bronze, right? Like, of course, the dial's not bronze. The bezel, in this case, is not bronze. Not all bronze watches have bronze bezels. So all you've got is the lugs, and these lugs are so svelte, which normally I would say is a good thing, but in a bronze watch, it's almost like you want more of the lugs. And it's the same when you're kind of viewing it from an angle, is the fact that it's not chunky and it's so svelte means that there's less of that beautiful patinated surface area that you want to see on a bronze watch. So it's kind of weird to dock points for it, but I will say, if you're considering buying it because it's a bronze watch, be aware that it's not quite as chunky and loud of a bronze watch as some of the other versions that are available on the market. But if you're considering the Combat Sub, one of the stainless steel versions of it, then the fact that it's so svelte is probably just an unambiguous good thing, because it makes it sit very discreetly on the wrist for a dive watch. All right, so what have we learned? I think to sum up, all we need to say is that basically you get what you pay for with Glycine. And I'm not saying it's a terrible watch. It's not a terrible watch. It's perfectly respectable of a watch for the price that you paid for it, and not for the price it's being advertised at. And that's what you should keep in mind. So when you see a Glycine watch like this Combat Sub is $380, and don't think to yourself that, oh, this is an amazing deal because it's 75% off, right? So if you see it, on online e-commerce sites such as eBay, or these often show up on Massdrop or even discount warehouses. I've seen them in Walmarts or Costco's or so forth. They want you to believe that it's a true luxury watch that's just happens to be a 70% off or 80% off. It's your lucky day, and that's not really the case, right? You're getting what you pay for. It is in fact kind of this maybe entry-level Swiss watch, kind of on the lower end of the Swiss watch industry, and it's not really worth that much more, if any more, than the price you're going to be getting it at. And it's not a bad price, but don't go into it thinking that you're getting an amazing deal. So even this like bronze watch that we spent so much time looking at, which is now you can see it's on eBay for $420. This is being recorded at a different time than the earlier segment. We can see that it's already the price has already changed, and it's even lower than it was being displayed at before. But even at this price, I mean, like it's fine. It's not a ripoff. But it's actually not a incredible price for what you're getting. You're getting a Swiss-made bronze watch with a Sellita movement, and this is the sort of thing that you can get of comparable quality for this price or less from other brands. Like Ergon is a micro brand that's coming up, and they're putting together a bronze dive watch, 300 meters of water resistance for $380. Also a Sellita movement, I think sapphire crystal. So yeah, spec-wise, pretty comparable. A brand very similar to where Glycine was a few years ago is Mathé Tissot, which is a Swiss brand with a lot of heritage that's, honestly, these days more of a discount brand. So you can see they've got a bronze watch, $345, also automatic movement. So you get what you pay for. All right. So when you're playing in this price range, a couple $100, $500 and under, you'll get a solid piece that will, be dependable, will last a long time, automatic movement, sapphire crystal, and so on. But it's not going to be a true luxury piece. The question you need to ask yourself is, buying a watch is such an emotional and frankly irrational experience. And when you do this, do you really want to associate with a brand that's so thoroughly identified with aggressive discounting and misleading marketing? And that's just a matter of personal aesthetic preference, really. No different than choosing what color to wear or, what kind of dial you want. So I guess in the end, it's up to you. Let me know what you guys think, and thanks for watching the video.